Friends, welcome. In today's episode, we have an incredible guest. He's actually my first facilitation inspiration. His name is Vipin Thekk. He is a leadership group member at Ashoka and also the founder of Togetherness Practice. It's a really awesome practice. In this call, you get to learn more about what Togetherness Practice is, but also be warned, this episode is filled with deep insights and it's really incredible. I'm leaving with so much excitement, so much enthusiasm and new insights on how to grow as a human, as a leader, as a facilitator, as a change maker. So tune in to my conversation with Vipin Thekk and let us know if you have any questions or ideas. Thank you and enjoy. Vipin, so incredible to have you here, my friend. Welcome. So excited to dive with you into this podcast.
Thank you, Mentor. Thanks for having me.
Hey, one thing that I'm very curious to learn from you to get started is how do you see the role of facilitation as you're a facilitator yourself, but also you facilitate processes for change makers, businesses, organizations, teachers, universities, like you're everywhere. And how do you see this role of facilitator?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of ways I would answer that question. A couple of years back, I remember hearing from in a podcast, this idea that the facilitators are the new priests, right? So the role of a facilitator, one perspective to consider is to creating the spaces and experiences where human beings can access the sense of the sacred inside themselves, with each other, and with the systems they're a part of, right? So I love that framing, which is to say this idea that the sacred has three spaces. And when I mean by the sacred, it's the highest in us. It's our deepest potential. It's the soul. It's the mystery or the universe which we are a part of. So how do you help create the spaces and rituals and practices that helps human beings to discover that sacred within themselves and between each other? So that's one way to think about the role of a facilitator. Another way to think about the role of a facilitator is to creating spaces that helps human beings access the wisdom within, right? So drawing it out, just to say, trusting that every person already has the answers they're already seeking and exploring in their life, but to ask the questions, hold the spaces that draws that out. Because the more you can approach it from that perspective, it is helping human beings be dependent on themselves and not just as an external person, like there's a facilitator or a coach. And the third thing which I would say is, what at least the way I orient towards facilitation is just looking at it from the perspective of how do you get human beings to work and play together, right? We look at the nonprofit world, right? I've always wondered, why aren't there mergers and acquisitions in the nonprofit world? There is so many nonprofits, and we seems to be settling for transactional change and not transformational change. So transformational change comes from the idea that how do we come together, collaborate, integrate our working and learnings to do something, build something which is larger than ourselves. The thing is, what comes in the way is the ego. What comes in the way is like, oh, will my organizational brand logo be bigger than your organizational brand logo in the final report, etc. So one of the roles a facilitator can do is to bring forth in a collective space that intelligence which is deeper than the human ego, which is the intelligence of spirit. So how do you again create the containers for human beings to deepen into friendship, deepen into relationships, and deepen into a new consciousness from which a new profound possibilities can come through them and come through all of us together. So there's a couple of perspectives.
Oh, that's like dropping a bomb right there. What a start. So I have a lot of questions, but I think my main curiosity is there seems to be this inner dimension to facilitation that I see you lead with. And also you mentioned here that there's this inner wisdom, this inner state. I've even had guests here in this podcast that they were like, my job as facilitator is to bring people together and to create ideas and to do all these things. And that's a style, but I feel like it misses some of that essence and flavor and transformation that you're talking about. So can you talk a little bit more about how does that tapping into your inner wisdom look like?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a very simple way to orient towards that is to say we are human beings. We are not just human doings. If you look at most work out there in the world today, there is so much of exhaustion, there's so much of burnout because we are doing, but not necessarily leaning into the part of our intelligence, which is the beingness, which is the stillness, which is the slowing down, which is the capacity to trust our instincts, our intuitions. It's the capacities of love, right? So a way to think about facilitation-based work, the way I orient towards it is to think about it as 3 dimensions. The dimension of the relationship you have with yourself, the inner work, and what comes in the way of you giving yourself the permission to do bold things in the world. So inner work. Then there is a relational work. So it's not just about me sitting and meditating in a cushion, but how do I deepen my relationship with mentor? How do I do work with a group of human beings which is anchored in love and trust and connection and not just powerlessness or, ego dynamics and passive aggressive behavior, etc. And then the last dimension is from that place, how do you create profound change in the world? So the nonprofit world, for example, has been talking about system change for the last 40 years. Are we close to solving any one social problem? We aren't. What? Right? And today we look at it, we see that it feels like problems are constantly outrunning the solutions. So one of the diagnoses about the fact that is we are all talking about changing the world or changing the system, but we are not enough talking about how am I creating this problem? What are my blind spots, my shadows, my way of being and doing in the world, which is coming in the way of me being part of transformational change? And more equally importantly, how am I being an asshole in my own life? Right? Like, how am I not living the highest values in my relationship, whether it's with my partner, with my parents, with my kids? So this breakdown about how to do things for the world, but not necessarily paying attention to the person you are, I think is a cause of a significant lot of challenges in the world today. So the way we think about it, and I'm happy to share this more in a bit, is this framework which we have built called the Togetherness Practice. So working on yourself, working on your own relational fields which you are a part of, and then from there creating social and systemic social change in the world. So reversing and focusing on, and it starts with the human being and the human doing, both, not just one or the other, both. So that's one way to think about inner work, and I'm happy to say more if you want specifically.
We will dive into that, absolutely, because it feels like it's an incredible work you all have done. And but before that, maybe a more practical question. So when people come to a session, they all have their own traumas. They all bring their own egos in a certain way. They all maybe are resistant to go there with you. So how do you address an audience that is, sees, for example, something like meditation as like woo-woo, or sees like, this doesn't work for me. I don't have time for this. This is unproductive. Or, we all have had those people. So how do you help people realize that? But also, how do you get the group to actually want to dive deeper that way?
Yeah. Now, so the way I approach it is to see, as human beings, we have access to 4 intelligences: the intelligence of the mind, the intelligence of the body, the intelligence of the heart, and the intelligence of spirit. What happens most of the time, we are in the intelligence of the mind. We want to know, we want to structure it, we want to know what's the purpose of this meeting. We want to go at 90 miles per hour. But 90 miles, there's this beautiful saying, we go at 90 miles per hour and we might win the rat race, but we are still a rat. Not the point of human existence on the planet Earth, right? So a way to think about engaging with people who might be cynical or suspicious about practices which might involve or invite them to be slowing down is to acknowledge that there is a truth in the resistance. So it's not something bad. So a way to think about it is, as a facilitator, everything that shows up in the field is a part of spirit. There is something sacred or beautiful about it, right? So learning to acknowledge and honor that experience. But secondly, creating experiences which brings forth the human soul, not just the mind, but the heart, the essence of who we are. And a way to think about that is to build practices of playfulness and intimacy. So if you break down the word intimacy, you get into me, you see. So every act of intimacy is a profound invitation to be seen as who we really are. And deep within the human soul, there is this longing to be seen, not with our titles and our achievements and accomplishments. Yes, all that. And the practice of like, this is who I am in my sense. So the practices we do is the practices of truthfulness, authenticity, and playfulness. So it's not like any serious things, but it is about creating spaces. So a way to ask, like a very simple thing we'll do is, we'll ask them. I was just on a call, and this was like 6 different people from very different parts of the world, and we had only 1 hour, and we needed to get something done. But instead of jumping right into the topic, instead of spending long time introducing ourselves and our accomplishments and our backgrounds, I said, if you were all going to a potluck, what is your favorite meal you would bring? So when you do that, what you're bringing forth is the heart, something personal, something a bit more intimate than the mind. You're dropping them into an intelligence, right? Or one of my favorite exercises to do, and you can find this on Google, is this exercise called Cross the Line. Just 5 minutes. You draw a line and you ask a series of questions. 5 to 6 minutes, the people have moved from their mind and into their heart. And then from there, if you invite them to slow down and do a mindfulness practice, and again, we need to understand we all have different ways of learning. So sitting and closing your eyes and doing heavy breath might not work for a lot of people. So then the question to ask them is, what helps you to slow down? Maybe it is going for a walk. Maybe it is drawing something. Maybe it is like listening for something. So adapting it, being flexible enough to meet where they are, honoring their resistance, because that has an intelligence of its own, but then creating practices around playfulness and intimacy as a starter almost always works.
That's incredible. And one of the things that I'm hearing also is that you're seeing participants in a different eye, and you're seeing them for their potential, and because I feel like you're treating them as though they have that potential, not the people as they don't know. Am I hearing that right? How do you relate to that?
Yeah, I remember one of my teachers telling me, I was going into a place when I thought it would be a pretty challenging conversation to hold. And then his response, I was like, how do I do it? What practices do I use? And his response to me was, Vipin, just love them. So it's not, so when you say the facilitator mindset or the heart set, that's really important. The quality of consciousness which you bring and you hold the space impacts the container you're creating. If you're anxious and stressed out, that will reflect in the container. If you're from a place of groundedness and in your own strength, from a place of love and connection, then that will reflect in the container. So because people pick up on energies, right? So your energy impacts the collective field's energy and vice versa. So when I say today, I don't see, even if it's a really difficult conversation. So when it is like, let's say, racism in the United States, it's a challenging conversation. People come with some really set ideas and traumas and perspectives. But to go into that space and I love what you said about, it's not just about seeing the surface level situation, but what's the energy under it. So as a facilitator, I'm tracking not just the content, I'm tracking the energy. So there's a way to think about conflict as stuck energy. So it's stuck. Energy is stuck. It's not moving. So all you need to figure out is how do you move the energy so that in the thing which felt conflictual dissolves. The way you do that is practices around truthfulness, practices around authentic communication, practices around intimacy and building soulful conversations, etc.
Oh, incredible. And how does what if here's a fear that I have, and many other facilitators share this as well. What if going inside in that dimension triggers like a trauma response or a panic zone? Because sometimes it feels like there's a thin line between therapy and this type of work, like an intervention. And is it our job to intervene here, or how do we, if something gets triggered, how do we, process and deal with that in a tough situation like that?
Well, I've done this around the world. We are holding these deep containers of transformation, and the way you can, support with that. So again, I'm not a therapist. I have life coach experience, but I'm not a therapist. I'm very clear. But people experience the work as therapeutic, which is a very different experience, right? So it's like this. A way to think about this is when you start doing deep container work, you have to build capacity in the container. So one of the ways I build capacity is giving every person in the circle the capacity to slow down and build the muscle of awareness, right? Awareness is a way. So if I'm noticing, oh, I'm getting really triggered by something, Vipin, as a facilitator, which you said, it's what I would do in that space is to say, tell me more. No, mentor, or I pick up on energy. I pick up on saying, mentor, I see that you're just feeling very disconnected. I would be very curious to know what's going on in your mind, right? Another way to solve for trauma from getting blown up is to say, every half an hour or 1 hour, get them to turn to a person sitting next to you, depending on the content which you're covering, and saying, check in with your heart. How is your heart doing? So what it does is you're preventing energies from building up in people, but constantly creating spaces to diffuse. One of my favorite things to do, and this almost always works, is to pair them up. Go for a walk in nature. Nature helps. So when you say you're afraid of trauma responses, a way to build your muscles to support that is to help people with practices which helps them relax their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Because trauma response is the nervous system coming up with energy and not knowing what to hold it. And these are genuinely really fearful challenges, right? But the fear of that should not come in the way of us asking those thoughtful, soulful questions, because there is so much of hunger and longing. So at a practical level, help practices which helps people calm down, reset their nervous systems. That's one. So mindfulness, walk in nature. Another way to think about, and the second thing is, don't let things build up, right? So to constantly give practices which helps people turn towards each other and find that relational field. The third thing which I would say is to constantly remind people about what is this work about. So I'm very clear when I speak. I'm saying the way, not in all spaces, but in the spaces where I can go deep, I will say this work is about meeting the three needs of the human soul. Every human soul has three needs: the need for being, the need for belonging, and the need for becoming. So when you orient towards that, at the front, people know, and I'll also say this might be challenging. Some of the territory is challenging, and when it is, raise your hand and ask for help. Almost always. And then if you need support, have someone who has a therapeutic background in the space to support you. So that's another way to think about it. Like to have the practical thing you could do is to have two facilitators. So if there is someone who's really triggered and needs support, you can go with that person, give that person one-on-one time, but the second facilitator can continue holding the space for the rest of the facility. So those are things which you can do.
Really nice. Really nice. Yeah. The ability to, I love how you said, setting the container, especially if it's a deep container, got to have that thick wall. And that's the wall of maybe self-regulation, having all these tools for you to introduce that and to set up that. I think that's actually really important how we establish that, because it can crack and do that. And Vipin, I'm curious to dive maybe into just one more bit. Is you said 2 people to facilitate. I'm curious, how do you manage facilitating with other people? This is something that you and I have done together. So I'm curious also your perspective. But it does feel like when you're holding space, as a facilitator, you kind of listen to that inherent wisdom that comes to you from the space, and then having another facilitator there can be a little bit more like, oh, that's a different energy, different thing. So what have you seen that actually works when there's more than one facilitator?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because getting human beings to work together is always a dance and a fight. It's a fun dance and a fight. So at times, so couple of things, practices you can do is what you did really beautifully before the beginning of this call. You set an intention. Intentions are powerful. So before you even start the facilitation work, to come together and say, what's our highest intentions for ourselves and for this group of people? That's one step you can do. Second step you can do is to pay attention, to have clarity on, so all the practical things about who's doing what, all that stuff, which I'm assuming I don't need to go into. But once all that is set up, the second thing is to keep paying attention at the end of the day or during the middle of the day, to care for the relational space between you two. And I'll say a bit more about that in the togetherness practice. Because anything, so you and I are holding a space for 50 or 100 people. Anything which is there unresolved in our space as energy will tip over into the container. So constantly paying attention to, and at the end of the day, so I remember working with one facilitator, and she was not necessarily very comfortable with vulnerability, her own vulnerability, right? So every time I say something which is like very vulnerable into the space about me, she would just rush and say, let's move on, right? And this happened once or twice, and it started feeling icky inside me. It started coming in our relational field. So we went for a walk and said, when you did this, I felt hurt. I felt not seen. Tell me more about what was going on for you. So that's the third principle, is to say, think for the always framing your, always intending as what's the word, what I'm looking for, like
Friction?
not friction. That thinking, like, it's easy to say, fall into the trap of thinking, assuming the best in the other. So it's easy to say, oh, she doesn't like it, or she's trying to assert control, or he's trying to do that. But when I approach it to say, I felt hurt, so I'm being authentic, tell me what was your experience. And then that opens up. So it's not a judgment, it's not a criticism, but it's more about a curiosity to understand what's going on for you. That's the third piece. And the fourth thing, which I would say, which I'm learning, is really investing, not, if you want to do the facilitation as a sacred practice, then also investing in your relationship outside work, building your friendship and getting to know each other as other human beings also is important, to let life energy move through between you. So a couple of thoughts.
Love that. Love that. It's fascinating. There's this, when you're designing for a session, right? Let's say you have a client. How do you design? How do you know what their needs are? How do you learn about, because it does feel like it's a lot of the emergent, but you still have to set up like a structure, like with Yale Center for Social Emotional Intelligence, what we set up a 9-month program, a fellowship idea, and all these things. But how do you discover the needs that they have, and how do you go about designing a program based on what their needs are?
Yeah, I mean, it differs in different context, of course. So yes, so we start with conversations, understanding. So one of the questions I ask is, what are you struggling with right now? In your work, in your personal life, in your relational life, where is the struggle? So there is always some form of struggle, and that's an entryway. the way I orient to it. So the other thing I'll say is, I really think the days of workshops are over. If you want to create, if you're committed to transformational change, you have to design journeys for people, because that's how the soul unfolds. That's how the greatest intelligence happens. It takes time. Doesn't go in 90 miles per hour, right? If you want to create belonging and meaning for people, it takes time. So I always design journeys, whether it's 3 months, whether it's 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 months, etc., or 18 months for that matter. Sorry, I got distracted for a second. So you were asking me about
designing journeys.
Yeah. So, and then third principle. Oh, I will always think about it this way. If you're a facilitator, don't just look for practices and tools. Look for principles. What are the principles which align, which you have conviction around, and then find practices and tools that supports the manifestation of those principles. So one of my principles is to look for what you said earlier. Is like, I look for the potential in the human being. I don't just see who they are. I see who they can become as individuals and collectives. When you think about it from that perspective, the perspective I lean into is a developmental perspective. So there is an entire field of body of work that's emerging in the world called adult development. How does adults, there is a lot of studies till child development, but we don't stop growing till after 18. So how does human consciousness unfolds over a lifetime? And so one of the principles I use is the principle of looking at it from adult development. But the second principle is the human being and the human doing. So every activity which you do around the doing, I'm balancing that with slowing down, building the relational field, helping them look at what's coming in the way, like the shadow work, all that good stuff. So that's the second principle. The third principle is just looking at it irrespective of, there are certain experiences which are universal, irrespective of who you are, where you're born, what is the work you do. And I found it helpful to look at it through the needs of the human soul. The need for being, I mentioned it briefly, being is like that relationship you have with self. And that's something, a mystery which we are all a part of. The need for belonging, build a connection and intimacy and trust and friendship. And there is a third need, which is the need for becoming. Like there is something evolutionarily built into the human experience, in my perspective, which is constantly looking at the unfolding of what I can become. So if you can, as a facilitator, when you create the space, keep these principles at the back of your mind. So the practices and the rituals you're offering them is deepening these three beings, right? The three B's, being, belonging, and becoming. And the last thing which I'll say, as when it comes to designing containers, is always move the energy in the space. So don't just spend 3 hours on a PowerPoint slide deck, but if you spend half an hour on a PowerPoint slide deck, which is intelligence, using the intelligence of the mind, move it into the heart, move it into spirit, move it into body. So keeping the energy moving helps that's how you work, right? There is a reason TED Talks are only 18 minutes, because that's the attention span of us, for most of us, right? So how do you get people to move the energy between using practices, which is mind, body, heart, and spirit, and constantly moving that around in the space also helps deepen the container. So these are some universal principles.
Fantastic. Let's dive into the togetherness practice, Vipin, because you're mentioning many different components of it. Can you tell us how this came to be, and what it is?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to talk about in this season of life. So the Togetherness Practice came about after 18 months of research with 170 social entrepreneurs, business entrepreneurs, spiritual entrepreneurs, young change makers. And we were trying to discern what's the soul's journey of an entrepreneur or a change maker. Why is it that certain group of people sees a problem and says, I'm going to do something about it, while a lot of us expects the government or the nonprofit world to fix it? And I've always worked, the longest time in my life, I had this particular obsession about finding or discovering the Alcohol Anonymous version for human transformation. So not programs or personality-led workshops, but core universal human principles which any group of people anywhere in the world can come together to self-actualize into their individual and collective potential. So at the end of 18 months of research and talking and gathering data, what came out was the Togetherness Practice, and you can visit it at togethernesspractice.org. And what it is it's just this really, why I like using the word, like it's an exquisite framework, and it is a series of deeply soulful practices. So framework on how change can and needs to and will happen, and then practices to implement and manifest that framework. It's the second thing I'll say about it is that it's a whole person approach, and it is a whole organization approach. So by a whole person, I mean it helps people to move between the intelligence of mind, body, heart, and spirit. And it's a whole organization approach, which means it's a tool which can be used to create collective and systemic change. The last thing which I'll say as introducing the framework is what the research said was there are 3 dimensions in which change happens, and the change, and all 3 are equally important. The first dimension was inner capacities. So what are the capacities you need to cultivate within yourself in order to thrive in times of rapid change? So 4 capacities showed up in the research. The capacity of awareness, slowing down. The capacity of meaning making. How are you making meaning of the things that happens in the world? The capacity of self-permission. How are you to give yourself the permission to create change and not talk about creating change? And the last is the capacity of responsibility. Inner capacities. Then what the data said was there are external conditions you can create in your team, in your congregations, in your churches, in your classrooms, in your departments, where you can create the conditions that helps other people discover the same potential, their inner potential. And so the question was that what the research said was, in your team, is there a culture of receptivity, openness to new ideas? Is there a culture which supports reflectiveness, slowing down, constantly asking, are we doing the work we need to do to create the impact we are having? The third one was belonging. Do we feel that we are part of something larger? Do we belong to each other? And then the last one was emergence, which was to say, how can we constantly be fluid and open and not just get stuck to a strategy just because we thought about it and that's not responsive to the people we are serving? So inner capacities, outer conditions. And we were feeling pretty pleased with ourselves. We had a nice website. We had all these inner and outer 2 sides of the coin, but something felt missing. So we went back to the data and we had this massive aha moment when we realized change doesn't happen just at the inner level. Because religion has always said mindfulness, slowing down, meditate and all that stuff. We're not close to solving most of the social problems. Then change doesn't only happen at the external conditions level, because the nonprofit world has been trying to change systems for the last 40 years and we're not close to solving any much of the social problems. So there is something in between. The third dimension of change, the one which is the most easiest to ignore or forget, is that if think about it as a sandwich, if the inner capacities are one slice of the sandwich and the external conditions are the second slice of the sandwich, the thing which holds it together, whether it is jelly or vegetables, that's the relational fields between human beings. That's where transformational change potential happens. It's in the relational field, the spaces between us. John O'Donoghue, is Irish poet, talks about this idea of bless the space between us. So when we went back into the relationship, when we went back and looked at the data, what we found was the relation of anytime, any group of human beings are coming together, 4 things to check in for. The need for pausing, slow down, pausing. Second was patterning, which is when things are not breaking, when relationships are not working, instead of trying to understand the patterns. The third thing, which is contributing to the breakdown in relationships, the third one was trusting or truthfulness. And the last one was, what's the last one? It's not emergence. It's like from that place, it's like creating new work in the world after going through pausing, patterning this thing. And we have a word for it, which I'm blanking out in this moment. You can find it on the website. So, two more things I'll say and I'll pause. One, what we are seeing, the impact of the togetherness practice is that in a country around the world where we are getting so polarized, what the togetherness practice is doing, it's helping people to reconnect with their shared humanity. When you do that, there is connection and friendship and trust. And then from there, you can do anything in the world. The second thing which it is doing is we also know relationships are hard for most people. So what we are building is we have built out practices for 90-second practices, 90-minute practices, 90 hours of practice, 90 days of practice, and 90 years of practice. Because we are always being relationships till the way we die. So it's a framework. There's a lot more to it. There are practices you can do, which is on the website, and you can find it at togethernesspractice.org.
Yeah, and also there's the link in the description of this podcast where you can learn more about that framework. Vipin, fascinating. Like, it's really fascinating that there is this, especially in today's society, it feels like the trend is going completely the opposite direction of being able to hold our relational space. For instance, today dating without texting is actually where we approach people. We don't go and be in that uncomfortable state to address something like that, or even in a workshop, or even in a team, even in whatever. If something is rubbing you off the wrong way, we're afraid, are we going to offend those people? We're maybe not able to hold our like tension and all this like stomach feeling to go and confront, have conflicts. So how do we deal with that? What is happening there?
Yeah. So when you just said, mentor, this feeling of uncomfortableness, of butterflies, everything which we are learning is this. Just underneath that or behind that or next to it is also joy and friendship and connection and trust. All these things which we crave for at a very deep level, right? Joseph Campbell once says, the cave which you fear to enter holds the treasure which you seek. The cave which you fear to enter holds the treasure which you seek. So by that, as a facilitator, if you're noticing tension in yourself, as a coach, you're like, is it okay to go there? Am I going to get a blowback, etc.? To bring curiosity to your interior experience first, which is the capacity of awareness to even understand, I'm noticing butterflies in my stomach. I'm noticing I'm feeling nervous, right? And then once you are able to reconnect and recenter yourself, and then to bring that. So one of the most powerful, this has been a big learning edge for me as a facilitator, has been to be vulnerable as a facilitator. To say, hey, seems like a heated conversation. I don't know what's the next best thing we could do. What do you guys think? So the way I orient towards it, and for me, it's been given me absolute freedom, is I don't put pressure on myself to have all the answers to all the possible scenarios which will show up. No, you cannot. I cannot. My brain is not that smart enough. But what you can do is you can orient towards a space to say, what's the role of, what's the sacred here? What's the beauty in this discomfort which we are facing as a collective, right? So constantly building that relational field prevents disruption to happen. So a simpler way to say all that when I just said is the very places where relationships break down, if approached with curiosity, can become the portals of break. Very places of breakdown. So if there is conflict between two members in your facility, in your team, in your group, to approach that with curiosity and love and patience, and then of course you need to have some tools to hold that conversation, and it's just always incredible. And so, which is why the togetherness practice comes in handy, is that every time a group of people, it's designed as a congregational practice, so thousands of people can do it at the same time. So I'm very clear, if it's, whether it is racism or environmental issues or reimagining religion, it doesn't matter what the content of what I need to facilitate. My first approach, day one, first hour, is to build the field, the relational field, in which anything can happen, any conversations can happen. So that's a great tool for you as a facilitator Because when the relational field is built, and by that what I mean is that the people in the container feel a sense of trust and intimacy and closeness and friendship. When rupture happens, you are not the only person who's holding it. The collective holds it with you.
Mhm.
And that's a great way to outsource the sense of pressure sometimes I've seen people face. But again, it takes courage and it takes an incredible amount of trust, not trusting the group of people, but trusting yourself. And that comes with experience and practice.
Oh, incredible, Vipin. For to do this, do you need to have the internal capacities in place? Because it does feel like entering a more vulnerable space, a deeper space, or ideally, not ideally, but like potentially a conflict place with somebody.
Yeah.
Do you need to have the internal capacities, and do you choose people who have that to join the workshops or the journeys, or do you help also in your facilitation to build those internal capacities?
That's where my life energy seems to be taking me, is to say, how do I help other facilitators or coaches or people who love this nature of work to build their interior relational and collective capacity to do this nature of work, right? So this idea that, so I love the togetherness practice as a framework also is because it touches the three faces of God, or the three faces of the sacred within us, the sacred between us, and the sacred around us, right? So I love the holisticness of that framing. It's a whole person, whole organization approach. And one of the places we are going, and I'm happy to talk to anyone who might be interested, is building journeys, either online or offline, to help coaches and facilitators to build that their own capacities within themselves. So whatever is the group of people they're working with, or whatever is the content, they feel resourced within themselves, and they have these tools which create soulful, meaningful conversations and dialogues to happen in them.
Mm. And when you're that's really nice. And when you're and this one thing I'd like to touch on, you said the days or the workshops are over, and I find that really fascinating. That actually journeys, and of course journeys have more time. There's more time to integrate. But do you see that that because sometimes what a problem is in this facilitation field is that, yes, we hold the 2-3 day workshop. Everybody feels great. They get to feel their things. But then Monday comes, you got to go to work, and then emails, and then this, and then you're back in the old patterns and doing that. So what is the reason for doing longer journeys rather
Right.
than singular interventions?
It doesn't necessarily have to be a longer journey. It's the principle. The principle is the principle of practice, right? So when we design these, like, for example, I just finished working with a nonprofit in Asheville, and we used the togetherness practice as a framework. They came to me and said, Vipin, here are 20 people we believe will be the future CEOs and CEOs of my nonprofit. They are struggling with, as managers today, they're struggling to keep people accountable. They are struggling with making hard decisions. Can you build their emotional capacity? So I said, sure. But what about their intellectual capacity? Or what about their spiritual capacity? So we moved and said, let's think about building whole human beings, like cultivating whole human beings, not building, sorry. And so we used the togetherness practices in our 3 retreats, 2 days each over a period of 6 months. And what came out of that was like working on the inner, but then every time they're between they're between the first retreat and the second retreat, they have an accountability buddy system, and they're cultivating practices based on what's the muscle they need to work. So a simple way to think about it is go to the togetherness practice and do a self-analysis. In the inner capacities, awareness, self-permission, meaning making, and responsibility. Mentor, what are you really strong at? And what is the muscle which you need to strengthen? So if I were to ask you, mentor, between awareness, self-permission, meaning making, and responsibility, what do you think you're really good at? You can do it in your sleep. But like the second one, I need to practice that a bit more. What would you say?
Hmm. Maybe patience is the second one. I do need to practice a little bit more, and what I'm good at is mobilizing and energy to build
Right.
momentum towards something.
So patience is the capacity of slowing down, which is awareness. If you have the energy to mobilize people, as you have, and I've known you enough to say you don't have any problems giving yourself the permission to create change. So self-permission, you're really good at. Awareness, you need to pay a bit more attention to. So find a partner, like in your team, who either has the opposite, like they're really good at awareness and they struggle with self-permission, and you become a buddy system and you do meet every 4 weeks. So that's the point which I'm trying to say. We've all gone to these weekend workshops where we jump off a cliff or walk on coal and our life has changed. And then Monday morning, you open Microsoft Outlook and the whole shebang goes normal. The reason it goes back normal is two reasons. One, you're not practicing the breakthrough or the insight. And second, you don't have the tools to change the context you're working in. So when we work with people, we're also giving them the tools to take this insight they have, these new capacities, and plug it into the mindset systems and the culture of the teams they are working in, the classroom they're working in, the churches they are a part of. That's why change. So the resistance to change decreases because we are working at the inner and the outer at the same time. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And the last thing which I'll say, which is, and I know you asked me this, I think 6-7 months ago, it's like, okay, Vipin, yeah, people will feel great about the togetherness practice. They'll feel friendship. And then so what? That was your question to me. And I love that question because at that point, I did not have the data. So here's what the data, impact data comes out after this nonprofit working with them for 6 months. We asked them, after which of the 4 inner capacities are you stronger in now because of 6 months of work? And then we asked them, because you have deeper awareness, how is that impacting your leadership? And then we asked them, think about the 4 external capacities. Which of this has strengthened in your team over the last 6 months? And because it has strengthened, how is that impacting the work which you do in the world? And the last one, the relational space, between the 4 relational criteria, which have you strengthened in your organization over the last 6 months? And because it has got, the relational field has got strengthened, how is the organization changed or evolving? Individual change, relational change, organizational change. So the place where I'm most passionate about taking the togetherness practice to, and the place which I think is the next field of body of work that is opening up, is teams of people. Because there's a lot of individual work, yoga retreats going on, and then there are organizational change consultants who are doing institutional work, but very few people are bringing all these 3 dimensions together to say, how do you do this with people who are inside companies, inside churches, or when any group of human beings work together? How do you get the magic to happen between them? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. That's great because sometimes, and I'm curious. Let's say you give during these journeys, they learn how to integrate these tools, right? So they learn how to, pay attention, slow down. They learn these things, and then they learn also how to, hold space with each other. That relational space. Is there any follow-up support to that? Is there a community where they can turn to? Is it how do you set up these structures? Because you're facilitating pretty much, lack of better terms, like training of trainers for togetherness practice, right? You're seeing this as a tool that people can learn, but also implement in their environments. And is 3 sessions enough, or there's something reoccurring, or if there's a space?
We are trying this out. So we only started bringing this out into the world. The research analysis only finished last June. So we are trying different formalities because we are also learning. So what we have tried doing it is, there's an in-person format, which we say 3 sessions of 2 days each over a period of 6 months, and then follow-up calls every 3 months for a year. That's one way. Then we are trying this hybrid approach, which is to say 6 sessions over a period of 3 months, every 2 weeks of 2 hours each. And then that's the online version, offline, online. And then we are trying a hybrid where we start with a 2-day retreat or we end with a 2-day retreat. and then we do these Zoom sessions of 2 hours each. So we are trying to meet people where they are, because like, especially we are working with now, it's a global organization which works with 60 plus people around the world, and it's hard to bring them all together in person, etc. And it works for me because for me, the design principle is the practicing part of it.
Yeah.
And the more you can create capacity for practice, the more this becomes muscle memory.
And that's fantastic. And here's another reason why to go subscribe to the newsletter, so you can stay in tune what they're coming up with, ideas, maybe programs you can join as a facilitator to learn and kind of explore that further. There's one thing that's been lingering in my head, and you mentioned meaning making, and that is such a fascinating term, because you see, like, if there's 3 people listening to this podcast, could be 3 different insights that completely same thing, same recording, but 3 different meanings are happening. And sometimes that meaning making can be really detrimental. Victimhood, like, oh, this always happens to me, and then I become the victim, and that's the meaning I'm making. Or like, I am, this is happening to me because it's their fault, and there's those narratives, those meanings. And as a facilitator, we of course get to sense where people are at, their energies, their body language, their thoughts. But there's internally, we get to also sense that what they're making out of this is actually not the most constructive thing. So how do we address meaning making? How do we support somebody get into create a healthier and more generative meaning making machine in their hearts?
Yeah.
And minds?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, human beings are meaning making machines, right? Actually, you're asking me the question. I'm making meaning about the question, and I'm going to respond in a way which makes sense to it. And there are multiple. So that's one thing. Meaning making, and especially when we look at it from the togetherness practice and seen from a developmental perspective, is the capacity to hold multiple perspectives without latching on to one particular perspective. I'll say that again. It's the capacity to hold multiple perspectives, diverse perspectives, without being obsessive about one perspective. That's one way to talk about meaning making. Integral theory by Ken Wilber and the 4 quadrants is a great way to help people expand their lens of what we mean by reality itself. So reality in the 4 quadrants is, there's a 4 quadrants of reality: the world within ourselves, the world in our cultural spaces, the world of systems, and then the world of behaviors, of signs, of the things that we can measure, right? These are all 4 dimensions of reality, and that's arising every moment. So one of the things we do when we meet people in person is help them draw 4 quadrants on the floor and ask them to move between. Where do you spend most of your time on a daily basis? Are you always inside? Are you always in the relational space? Are you figuring out changing the systems? Are you thinking about behaviors, etc.? So that's one way to think about it. The second way, and it's a lot of challenges we are facing today in the polarization world, is the absence of the capacity of meaning making. Because I could say I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, or vice versa, right? There is the absence of the curiosity to say, oh, tell me, why do you feel so strongly about your trade policy or some other, controversial issue, right? Or the United States, or racism, or whatever it is, right? And that curiosity to understand, instead of saying, no, it's my way or the highway, that's where the breakdown is happening, which is why I'm saying a way to shift meaning making is helping people build the meaning making is to build relationships. So you might be a Republican and I might be a Democrat, and we are going like this. But when I understand, oh, you love swimming and you love cooking, and so do I, and I have a child and you love to babysit, that helps us to reconnect with human. And when I can reconnect with mentor as a human being, I still will disagree with your politics, but I will not make you the enemy. That's what's important, right? And so the meaning making, so this is why I'm saying, if you're a facilitator and you're having to deal with the complex topic, build the relational field first, so that when you bring up a challenging topic and things are going all over the place, there is a foundation in which people can fall into of trust and connection and intimacy. And that's what the togetherness practice liberates in people.
Wow. Wow. I haven't heard such good description of that. I think that's all star. I love it, man. Thank you for sharing that. When there's and there's two more questions.
Can I just say one more thing? Just
Yes, please.
sorry. As someone who's hearing this, it's possible that the meaning they just made about what I just said was, oh, now I need to learn how to create containers of trust or friendship. No. Here's what we learned. 99.99% of the time, when you go to the Togetherness Practice website and do the practice of what the breakdown practice, there's a breakdown practice or a breakthrough practice, and the stuck exercise. And people do one of my stuck exercise now, and it's only like 45 minutes per partner, per pair. When we ask them after the practice, turn to the relational field between you and say, what's here? 99.99% of the time, people will say, there's more love, there's more connection, there's more trust and understanding. Now, how did you create that much in 45 minutes? So the hypothesis I'm making is, between any human relational space, there is this already existing reservoirs of trust and love and connection. But to access that, you need to get the myth out of the way. The fear, the politics, the powerlessness or powerfulness, or what will he think or what will she think. So when you get the muck out of the way, it's already here. That's what is sacred about the human experience on planet Earth. You don't have to go find love. It's right there. You just have to shift the meaning making in which you're seeing your partner in front of you. So just to qualify that.
Now I have other questions. You mentioned stuckness. And can you tell us, because is stuckness a practice or is inside the togetherness? Tell us about stuckness.
There are two ways. We are building out more, but there are two very easy ways to get to the experience of togetherness. So if you go into the practice guide on the website, scroll down, you'll see a 90-minute practice. Click on 90-minute practice, which is going deeper. The first set of exercises, and it's very self-explanatory and anyone can do it without facilitation help, is I feel stuck. So mentor and Vipin are partners, and mentor would say, you could say, each person will say, an area in my life I feel stuck with, in my relationship with my mother, in my work, with my colleague, etc. And then there are questions from the mind, the body, the heart, and spirit, which mentor can ask Vipin from the website. The questions are already there. And that helps me with the intention of getting me unstuck. And then we reverse, and then I ask you, mentor, tell me something which is terrible. Then I'll ask you the questions, trusting my instincts and with the intention. And that's when I said, the moment you do that practice within 45 to 90 minutes, 50, 60 minutes, something just deepens. What that is, it's a mystery. But my hypothesis is that it's already here, right? And the other, yeah.
It's fantastic. Fantastic. So last question is, what is one piece of advice that you have for a facilitator? What is like the one lesson that you have learned that you feel like would be helpful for facilitators to embody?
Let me just take a breath. Yeah, what comes up is, prioritizing, paying attention to your own beingness, not just do your doingness. While it's the quality of consciousness with which you bring forth an exercise or a ritual to do with a group of people, that quality of consciousness of presence is as important as the content of the practice itself or the process of the practice itself. So the human being and the human doing. And then the second thing is to look at the whole world of adult development, because I think that's the next frontier for facilitation-based work. And the third thing which I'll say is to find a practice, and this is my word. It may not be different from your word, but to build your relationship to that which is the mystery, that which is grace, that which is divine, that which is sacred. Because one of the things I found significantly powerful in facilitation from this space is the practice of surrender. When I know that Vipin I have some tools and techniques and frameworks, but at the heart of it is a profound act of surrendering to be an instrument of a grace which is larger than me. What I call it, what you call it, is secondary. Doesn't matter what you call it, but you can feel it. Like so this is my advice would be constantly emptying yourself to be the most profoundly beneficial instrument of that grace for the well-being or the good of all, as many people as possible. That's for me, it's my practice, and I found it profoundly helpful, and that's what I would share.
Wow. Vipin, we started with incredible depth and we're ending with incredible depth. This seems like it's a rabbit hole. So for those of you who want to learn more, of course, we're going to have Vipin come back again, but also learn more about Vipin. You can find him at togethernesspractice.org and LinkedIn and every other place. So thank you for coming here. Such a pleasure. I learned so much and so grateful for you and the work you're doing.
Thanks, mentor. Always a delight to be with you.